When you look at what the Pakistanis have done for us since 9/11, they help us wreck a perfect government for them in Afghanistan in the form of the Taliban. They allowed us to expand our intelligence and our military presence in their country. We had virtually free overflight rights. We've turned part of Karachi into a NATO naval base. And most of all, Musharraf and now the gangster we put into power there, what's his name?
Haqqani?
No, Bhutto's husband, have sent the army into the border areas, which has brought them a civil war to their country. I think that we could look a long way to find any other ally that has helped us to that degree. It was never, from 9/11, in the interest of the Pakistani nation or government to turn over to us or kill Osama bin Laden. And had we had adults in the White House at any time in the last 3 administrations, we would have known that. And we would have realized that at some point the Cold War is over, adulthood is again valued in leaders, and we would take our own part in things and not depend on third world dictators to do our business. So I don't have much use for the idea that the Pakistanis are not helping us. They're helping us to the extent that it's in their interest to do so. It would be just as feckless, I think, to expect the CIA or the MI6 to accept a tasking for a foreign government that runs contrary to their country's interests.
How about the charge that the ISI shelters and even in some cases actively helps the Haqqani network, which is shipping explosives, manpower, weaponry into Afghanistan, killing U.S. troops?
We're in the way, aren't we? We went there on a 15-month mission. We're now there 10 years. We're going to leave the Pakistanis holding the bag with an extraordinary mess in their country. They will not tolerate, they cannot tolerate from a security perspective the survival of Karzai or anything resembling him, which is allied with Iran, with Russia, especially with the Indians. You know, again, it's an adult world. And the Pakistanis need a government in Afghanistan that will suit their interests and protect their western border and keep it quiet.
So supporting the Haqqanis means defeating Karzai?
It means defeating Karzai, and we have surrendered. They know we're not going to clean up the problem. We're just going to leave, and the problem will be there for them to clean up. And they have to look out for themselves. What do they say? It's a rough neighborhood. So I don't think it's surprising that they're helping Haqqani and the other folks.
Tom, how about the notion that we're using the military to fight a terrorist organization?
I think there are circumstances where conventional forces, primarily ground units, can be used effectively in overwatch, in surveillance, in looking at large areas, preventing movement, etc. Becomes more problematic when you try to have conventional forces with an active hand amongst a population, because that requires really a good deal of sophisticated training. And I often thought during my visits to Iraq that it would have been much more effective to take those brigade combat teams, which in some cases were 5,000 people in conventional soldiers, in forward operating bases or in major bases that didn't seem to be having much of an impact on the population. They would go out, a lot of patrols, a lot of ambush. Interaction with the various Iraqi population was in some cases problematic, whereas if you looked at how the Green Berets operated with a cultural awareness, interacting and being close to the Iraqi forces that they were trying to train, you saw that that was probably a much more effective approach. But is there a use for conventional forces in terrorist situations? Oftentimes, yes. Is it ideal? Probably not.
I think one of the most damaging things to American security is to continue to call the Taliban or the Lashkar-e-Taiba or Al-Qaeda terrorist organizations. If they were terrorist organizations, they would be destroyed by now. There's no terrorist organization that could absorb the punishment the U.S. military, for example, inflicted on the Taliban after 9/11. They're insurgents. They're soldiers without uniforms. You know, if we would simply stand back for a moment and say, how many times have you heard a number 2 or a number 3 or a number 4 of Al-Qaeda killed in the past decade? Dozens, hundreds, whatever you want to call it. And yet the organization goes on. Same thing with different groups around the world, Islamist groups. Terrorism is a term that certainly is applied to people you don't like, people you want to delegitimize. But in the United States, it's also used to quash any debate about what you're doing, because a terrorist certainly can't say anything that's worth hearing, so why bother to listen to what they say? Well, why bother is it gives you an idea of how poorly our politicians have used the bully pulpit to educate Americans. There's virtually nothing in the rhetoric of Osama bin Laden or Ayman Zawahiri or the LET guys or anyone else that talks about we're going to attack those Americans because the Iowans vote early in presidential primaries every 4 years, or we hate liberty, or we hate women in the workplace. We're being attacked because of our foreign policy, because of what the U.S. government does in the Muslim world. And until we understand that, we can't win. And until we listen to what the enemy says, we can't understand what he's up to. And as long as we call them terrorists, we won't listen. And so it's an endless problem, which leads eventually to more blood and loss of money in the United States.